In a bustling auto shop, right in the heart of New York, Tasha Brooks, a 20-year-old black woman and the shop's only female mechanic, was bent over her work when, all at once, a heavily tattooed Hells Angels rider in a menacing leather jacket stormed in. Panic etched on his face. He begged for his bike to be fixed immediately so he could rush to the hospital where his daughter had just been in a serious accident. While everyone else in the shop turned away coldly and hurled insults, Tasha didn't hesitate to step forward and help, only to be met with the bitter consequence of getting fired on the spot by the manager. What Tasha couldn't have guessed was that the biker was the younger brother of the CEO of the auto shop conglomerate, and what happened next would leave everyone stunned. That frigid December morning wound its way through every corner of Manhattan, sending pedestrians scurrying to escape the biting cold. Yet, inside the renowned Lexington Avenue repair garage, the air was hotter than ever. Cars of every make and model queued up waiting for service. Neon lights flickered above a ceiling streaked with oil, and the roar of engines and clatter of metal merged with the mechanics' teasing banter to create a chaotic, high-pressure scene. In a tucked-away corner of the shop, amid that racket, Tasha Brooks worked under the chassis of a brand-new red Ford Mustang. Oil smeared her dark blue coveralls, her nimble hands expertly twisted each bolt, and her bright brown eyes shone with intense focus. At 20 years old, she was the youngest mechanic on the crew, but no one could deny her exceptional skill or her tireless work ethic. Still, her excellence never earned her the respect she deserved. Surrounded by men, she was the target of whispered gossip and barely concealed contempt. More than once, cutting remarks flew her way. "Hey, sweetie, your hands are so small. You can't even loosen that bolt. Need me to show you how?" Co-worker Rick taunted, his smirk inviting the rest of the gang into raucous laughter. Tasha said nothing, swallowing her anger and carrying on as if she'd heard nothing. She knew that any response would only make things worse. But each barb chipped away at her pride and fueled her determination to prove herself all the more. Just then, Derek Mason, the burly, perpetually scowling manager in his 40s, strode in from the office. His icy gaze swept over the crew before settling on Tasha. He never acknowledged her talent. Instead, he looked for every opportunity to criticize and demean her abilities in front of everyone. "Brooks, pick up the pace. We didn't hire you to stand around and admire the scenery," Derek barked, his voice as cold as the morning air. Laughter rippled through the shop. Clenching her jaw, Tasha kept her voice steady and polite. "Yes, sir. I'll have it done right away." Derek shot her one last disdainful look before turning on his heel. Tasha sighed, tightening her grip on the wrench until her knuckles turned white. She didn't mind the heavy labor or the long hours that stretched into the night. What she couldn't tolerate was the constant injustice and bias around her. Just a small chance, she told herself, would let her change everything. But on that icy December morning in the heart of the city, all she could do was grit her teeth and wait, unaware that in just a few short hours, her fate would be completely upended. Just as Tasha was still wrestling with the bitter sting of everyday injustice, the wind chime above the garage door jingled urgently, shattering the shop's usual rhythm. A tall, heavily tattooed man burst in, his face ashen and wild with worry. His black leather jacket was covered in Hells Angels insignia, and his cold blue eyes darted around the room, searching for help. "I need someone to help me, right now," he called out, his voice tight with panic, not even pausing to notice the hostile stares aimed his way. "My bike broke down just around the corner. My daughter's been in a serious accident and she's in the hospital waiting for me. Please." At the sight of his intimidating tattoos and menacing presence, the shop fell utterly silent. Every pair of eyes watched him warily. Customers halted what they were doing and backed away like he was a threat. A few mechanics even turned their backs, ignoring his desperate plea. Rick, still clutching his wrench, sneered under his breath loud enough for the others to hear. Great, another street thug dropping by to cause trouble. This place doesn't cater to lowlifes. Mocking laughter rippled through the shop, laced with suspicion and malice. Just then, Derek Mason stepped out of the manager's office, his face immediately contorting into a scowl at the unexpected intrusion. He planted himself in front of the man, Ray Carter, his eyes raking over him with cold defiance. "Sorry, but we don't do walk-ins," Derek said, his tone as sharp as a knife, "especially not for people like you." Ray blinked, taken aback, his breathing growing more ragged. "I'll pay whatever you want. I just need help now," he snapped, forcing back his anger, his blue eyes flashing with desperation and pain. But Derek didn't budge. "We're not the kind of garage that wants anything to do with people like you," Derek replied icily, folding his arms as though to bar the man from any further appeal. Derek's words hit Ray like a blow. His broad shoulders slumped, and his massive hand trembled as he brushed a distracted hand across his face. He turned away, panic clouding his gaze as he searched in vain for a sympathetic face among the sea of cold onlookers. Tasha stood rooted in place, reading every line of anguish on Ray's face. She felt a surge of empathy at the sight of this desperate, powerless father, rejected purely because of appearances. She recognized that familiar ache, being cast aside and underestimated by people who refused to understand. In that defining moment, Tasha took a single, determined step forward, her sense of justice aflame. She knew her choice could bring serious consequences, but she couldn't stand by and watch someone else suffer injustice as she herself had so often. "Wait!" Tasha's voice cut through the tension. Dozens of heads snapped toward her, especially Derek's, his glare ice cold. "What kind of bike is it, and where exactly is it?" Ray Carter looked back, surprise flashing alongside a glimmer of hope at having someone finally treat him like a human being. Gathering himself, he replied, breathless but grateful, "It's a Harley-Davidson, parked just around the corner. It's stalled out. I can't get it started." Derek strode forward, growling a warning at Tasha. "What are you doing, Brooks?" "I told you. We don't serve people like him." Tasha held Derek's gaze with unflinching resolve. "Mr. Mason, this garage exists to fix bikes and to help people in need. I'm going to take a look at his bike." Derek ground his teeth, anger flashing in his eyes. But with all the customers watching, he didn't argue further. He lowered his voice, menace still in his tone. "Remember this, Brooks. Don't give me any reason to regret hiring you." Tasha said nothing. She stepped past him and walked straight to Ray. The moment their eyes met, a deep understanding passed between two people cast aside by society, each bearing their own private pain. "Let's go," Tasha said softly to Ray. "I'll get your bike running so you can make it to your daughter." Together, they left the garage under the watchful, doubtful stares of dozens of onlookers. Tasha knew full well that her choice could unleash far more trouble than she'd ever imagined. But in that moment, her compassion and courage banished every ounce of fear. The sound of Tasha's and Ray's footsteps had barely faded through the garage door when Derek Mason spun back around, his eyes blazing with anger at the cluster of mechanics whispering among themselves. He ground his teeth, each word clipped as he fought to keep his temper in check. "Enough gawking, everybody back to work." The shop fell into a heavy silence. Outside, on the busy street corner, Tasha's full attention was on the Harley-Davidson lying motionless on the curb like a wounded beast. Ray stood beside her, fists clenched at his sides, Anxiety etched across his face as he kept glancing down at his watch, every passing second deepening his despair. "Can you tell me more about what happened before it died?" Tasha asked, crouching to inspect the bike with calm precision. Ray drew a shaky breath, voice trembling with tension. It sputtered, like it lost power, and then just cut out. "I tried to restart it a dozen times, but nothing. I really need to get to the hospital. My daughter—" His voice broke. In that moment, Tasha looked up and saw the vulnerable fear in Ray's once steady blue eyes. The pain in his voice reminded her of her own mother, a single parent who wore strength like armor, but carried anxiety and helplessness beneath it. That memory solidified her resolve. "I understand. Trust me. I'll get you back on the road as fast as I can," she said softly, then bent over the bike's electrical system. Suddenly, Derek reappeared in the doorway, his cold glare cutting straight to Tasha. Other mechanics pressed forward, their judgmental whispers and scornful shakes of the head following him. "Brooks!" Derek's voice rang out with authority. "One more chance. Get back inside right now. Stay out of things that don't concern you." Tasha straightened, meeting his furious, contemptuous stare. In that heartbeat, everything else faded away. The traffic, the pedestrians, even Ray's ragged breathing, all became background noise to the silent battle in her mind. She knew this was more than helping a stranger. It was a choice between false safety and the courage to fight injustice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mason." Her voice was low, but unwavering. "But I can't stand by while someone's left stranded just because of who they are." Derek stepped forward, rage twisting his features. His tone dropped to a menacing growl. "You're making a huge mistake, Brooks. I guarantee you'll regret this." Tasha held his gaze, silent and resolute. Then she turned back to the Harley, resuming her work with decisive purpose, removing the engine cover and scanning every component. Ray watched, anxiety and guilt flickering across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. "You don't have to—" Tasha cut him off gently but firmly, not taking her eyes off the bike. "Don't worry. This is my choice." Ray's expression softened. In her determination, he saw both genuine kindness and remarkable strength. A spark of hope lit his features. Minutes later, Tasha found the culprit, a broken ignition wire. With practiced efficiency, she reconnected it. At her touch, the engine thundered to life, its roar echoing down the street. Ray's face lit up with relief. "Thank you. I can't thank you enough," he called, clasping her shoulder in gratitude. Tasha offered a small, warm smile, only to see Derek looming in the garage doorway, his expression thunderous. "Brooks, office, now." His cold command made everyone fall silent, realizing the storm Tasha was about to face. She inhaled deeply. Fear flickered, then was replaced by unwavering resolve. Turning to Ray, she gave him an encouraging nod. "Go. Your daughter needs you." Ray held her gaze a moment longer, gratitude shining in his eyes. He kicked the Harley into gear and sped off, the engine's roar fading into the distance and leaving Tasha standing alone before the garage, ready for the confrontation ahead. The roar of the Harley-Davidson engine had just faded around the corner when Tasha turned and stepped back into the garage, only to feel the air freeze under Derek Mason's furious glare. He stood in the doorway to his office, face shadowed, every harsh line etched with anger. The colleagues who had once worked shoulder to shoulder with Tasha now stood silent, avoiding her eyes as though they feared being caught up in the storm to come. "Brooks," Derek's voice cut through the tension like a blade, each word dripping with contempt. Who do you think you are, leaving your station to help someone like that?" Tasha stopped a few paces from him, fighting to keep her hands from trembling. She lifted her chin and met his threatening stare with steady resolve. "Someone like that?" she asked calmly, her tone clear but challenging. "He's a father desperate to reach his injured daughter. I see nothing wrong with helping him." "You either don't understand or you're pretending not to. I don't care about your sob story." Derek stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his voice rising with menace. "We have rules here, Brooks, and you broke them flagrantly in front of everyone." Tasha glanced around at the cold, indifferent faces of their co-workers watching the confrontation. No one dared to speak up or defend her. A bitter loneliness crept into her chest, but it did nothing to shake her resolve. "Mr. Mason," she said firmly, "what rule is more important than humanity in aiding someone in crisis? If I had the choice again, I'd do it all over." Derek's fists clenched at his sides, his face reddening with rage. Veins stood out on his neck as he pointed an accusing finger at Tasha. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a naive kid showing off. I won't tolerate anyone flouting this shop's policies. Tasha Brooks, you're fired, effective immediately." His words hit like a hammer blow in the stunned silence, shattering Tasha's pride. Every eye in the garage locked onto her, but none spoke up, not a single protest or word of solidarity. A few pretended to be busy at their stations. Others turned away as if she were contagious. Tasha stood frozen, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the crushing disappointment of realizing she was utterly alone. All these months she had hoped her co-workers would come to respect and accept her. Now the harsh truth was undeniable. She never truly belonged here, and they never saw her as part of the team. "I understand," she whispered, her voice small yet unwavering. "If helping someone is a fireable offense here, then I don't belong." With that, she turned and strode toward her locker, methodically packing her few belongings. Wrenches, screwdrivers, battered gloves, all the tools that had been her constant companions, felt heavier than ever in her hands. Derek remained unmoving, watching her every move with a cold, calculating gaze, ensuring she left without delay. Before stepping through the door, Tasha glanced back one last time, catching the distant, impassive faces of her former teammates. She said nothing, only let her eyes convey the depth of her disappointment and her unwavering resolve. The oppressive silence pressed in on everyone. Stepping out into the biting Manhattan afternoon, Tasha felt the cold more sharply than ever. The garage door slammed shut behind her, severing the last ties to her past there. She walked on with her head held high, though inside she carried a vast, lonely emptiness. On that frigid afternoon, Tasha realized that courage and compassion often come with a steep price. But she also knew that even if she had lost her job, she would never lose her self-respect, or the values she held dear. The garage door had barely clicked shut behind her when Tasha tightened her grip on her bag and set off with heavy steps along the familiar, crowded streets of Manhattan. The fading light of dusk filtered between the skyscrapers, casting her in a cold, pale haze. All the usual city noise, the honking horns, chatter of pedestrians, suddenly felt distant and unreal, as if she were walking in a different world, one she no longer belonged to. Ascending the creaky staircase to her small third-floor apartment, Tasha felt each step grow heavier, as though the events in the garage were weighing her down. Inside, the apartment was silent and chilly, with only the steady tick-tick of the wall clock filling the emptiness. She dropped her bag onto the sofa and sat, staring at the blank space before her. A sharp pang of pain struck her, not from losing her job, but from the cold indifference of the people she had trusted and tried to fit in with every day. It was the ache of betrayal, of being cast aside, and it cut deeper than she'd expected. Memories flooded back, so vivid they stung. She remembered her first day in the shop, the doubtful glances, the male co-workers mocking her, pointing, uttering scornful jibes that felt like little knives against her pride. "How's a girl like you supposed to handle this? You'd better go home, Brooks. This place isn't for you." And most of all, she recalled Derek Mason's unyielding gaze, always judging her as less capable, even though she worked twice as hard. The baseless reprimands, the blame whenever something went wrong, the silent endurance she forced herself into just to keep her position. It played in her mind like a relentless, cruel film. Tasha exhaled and felt her resolve harden. She knew she'd just lost her only source of income, the very means she used to care for her aging mother. But she did not regret her choice. Helping Ray had awakened a truth within her. She had tolerated injustice for far too long simply to belong. She rose and walked to the small window, looking out at the darkening sky. The city lights of Manhattan flickered on, the streets alive and vibrant once more. In that moment, she understood she stood at a crossroads. Either continue bowing her head to society's prejudices or rise up and refuse to bend ever again. Loneliness still weighed on her heart, but now her self-respect and desire for justice burned brighter than ever. From this point forward, she vowed she would never again allow anyone to diminish her kindness or integrity. Turning back to the little table, she picked up the single photograph of her and her mother on graduation day. In the picture, her mother's face radiated pride as she wrapped her arms around Tasha. Gently, Tasha traced the photo's surface, and a single tear slid down her cheek. Yet her eyes gleamed with determination. "Mom," she whispered, voice firm, "I promise I will never bow again. I'll stand up and fight for what I believe in." That night, the small apartment brimmed with her quiet thoughts. But in Tasha's soul, a fierce resolve and unwavering faith had ignited, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning, just as dawn's first light filtered through her window, Tasha sat up in her tiny room, the pale beams tracing the lines of exhaustion and worry on her face. After a night of restless thought, she realized that, even though her future was uncertain, her purpose had never been clearer: to fight for her own dignity and for justice. She gathered a few personal things and resolved to return to the garage one last time to grab the tools she'd left in her locker. Each step along the familiar street felt heavy, weighed down by the bitter memories of the previous day. But as she turned the corner, the garage loomed into view, and her heart leapt. There, by the door, stood Ray Carter. His posture was steady, his gaze fixed on her as if he'd been waiting. Tasha froze, surprise slowing her steps. "Ray, what are you doing here?" she asked, voice trembling with astonishment. He hurried forward, his face calm now, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I came back to find you," he said warmly but firmly. "I couldn't leave the city without thanking you. Because of you, I made it to my daughter's side in time." His voice wavered as he spoke of his child, the fear of yesterday still palpable, but now tempered by relief and gratitude. Looking her straight in the eye, he said earnestly, "The doctors told me that if I'd arrived even a minute later, things might have been very different. I owe you more than I can ever repay, Tasha." Hearing those words, a wave of emotion rose in Tasha. For the first time, after years of injustice, her kindness and courage were genuinely recognized and appreciated. "Thank you for coming back to say that," she replied softly, her eyes warm. "But I was just doing what anyone should do." Ray shook his head, his expression grave. No, you did far more. I saw how much you risked helping me. I'll never forget that. He reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a small slip of paper, offering it to her. This is my number. I'm not one for empty promises. But please know, whenever you face trouble, whenever you need help, call me. I'll be there for you, just as you were there for me. Tasha took the paper and stared at the handwritten digits, feeling a strange warmth bloom in her chest. In a world so quick to judge, she had never before felt such genuine trust from someone she'd just met. In that moment, the small spark of hope she thought had died the day before flared brightly once more. "Thank you, Ray," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion, tears sparkling in her eyes. "It means more to me than I can say right now." Ray gave her a gentle smile, his eyes kind. "Keep in touch, Tasha, and remember, you are never alone." He walked over to his Harley-Davidson, fired up the engine and rolled away into the soft morning light. The bike's roar faded, but his words lingered in Tasha's mind, a reminder that the integrity and compassion she chose to embrace would always hold value, no matter how harsh the world might be. She turned back to the garage door one last time. Though she still felt sorrow and bitterness, she also felt a newfound lightness, knowing she had made the right choice, and that choice was already bringing something good into her life. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and stepped into the garage to collect her remaining tools. In Tasha's heart, there was no room left for fear, only courage and hope for whatever lay ahead. Tasha stepped back through the garage doors, her gaze calm and resolute. Inside, the usual clatter of engines and clang of metal filled the air. Everything so normal, it almost felt like yesterday's events had been a terrible dream. But the sudden hush and the scrutiny of her former co-workers the moment they recognized her reminded her all too clearly that it had been real. She moved swiftly toward her locker at the far end of the shop, the little corner where she had quietly prepared for work each day. Then she felt Derek's heavy footsteps behind her, his presence as oppressive as ever, like a shadow of the past refusing to let go. "Back again, are you, Brooks?" Derek's voice rang out, cold and mocking, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've got some nerve, no shame at all." Tasha stopped, squared her shoulders and turned to face him directly. This time, she wouldn't bow her head or look away. She met his eyes with steady confidence. "I'm just here to collect my things," she replied, softly but firmly. "Don't worry, I won't be long." Derek closed the distance, his stare sharper than ever, the same arrogant smirk on his face as he addressed the silent mechanics watching their confrontation. "It's a shame, Brooks. If you'd known your place or followed orders, you wouldn't be in this situation." Anger flared inside Tasha. This was no longer about rules or misunderstandings. It was blatant humiliation and contempt she could no longer accept. "Perhaps you've grown so used to belittling others that you no longer recognize how wrong it is." Tasha's voice rang out clearly across the garage. Her eyes were unwavering, her stance unyielding. "I've worked hard and followed every rule, except choosing to help someone in need. Yet you've always dismissed me simply because I don't fit your mold." A sudden silence fell. Co-workers who had feigned indifference now turned to watch, surprised and curious at this unprecedented standoff. "I don't need your analysis or opinions," Derek snapped, though his confidence wavered under Tasha's unexpected strength. "You're just another employee, someone this shop could replace in a heartbeat." "That's not the issue, Mr. Mason," Tasha replied calmly, stepping forward until Derek involuntarily took a step back. The issue is that you've never respected anyone as a person. I used to think silence was the only way to survive here, but now I see that silence only enabled your behavior." Derek frowned. Anger mingled with confusion. Never before had a young mechanic, let alone a woman, stood up to him so directly. "You really think words like that will change anything?" he snarled, voice trembling with rage. "Maybe not you," Tasha answered evenly, her gaze sweeping across the row of co-workers watching. "But at least I won't remain silent in the face of injustice. They may not speak up today, but one day they'll realize that every time they bow their heads to wrongdoing, they help perpetuate it." With that, she turned on her heel and strode toward the garage exit, her footsteps echoing decisively in the sudden stillness. Derek stood frozen, face flushed with fury, staring after her small but fearless figure. At the threshold, Tasha paused and glanced back at Derek one last time. There was no anger in her eyes now, only pride and strength. "Goodbye, Mr. Mason," she said softly but clearly. "I hope one day you learn to respect people for the value they truly deserve." The garage doors closed behind her, leaving Derek dumbstruck, both stunned and seething at the unexpected courage of the woman he had long underestimated. And for the first time, Derek felt a strange unease, an unsettling sense that he had just lost something far more important than he'd realized. The moment Tasha's footsteps faded from the garage, her heart still racing from the tense confrontation with Derek, she made her way home. But the relief she felt didn't last long. When she reached her tiny apartment, she found a surprise waiting at her door. A small folded note slipped under the threshold, impossible to miss. She bent down and picked it up, surprise flickering in her eyes as she read the bold, authoritative handwriting. "Miss Brooks, please return to the garage immediately. I need to see you. James Carter, CEO." Her pulse quickened. James Carter wasn't a name she'd ever heard spoken lightly. He was the head of Manhattan's most prestigious auto shop chain, wielding power from behind the scenes. During her time at the garage, she'd only caught glimpses of him when Derek tried to name drop. She'd never imagined she'd receive a personal summons from that commanding figure. A dozen questions raced through Tasha's mind. Why did he want to see her? Had Derek spun a false story about her? Was this a real opportunity or just another trap? She couldn't deny that yesterday's ordeal had made her more cautious than ever. Still, despite her misgivings, Tasha decided to go. She knew running away wouldn't solve anything, and deep down, she held a fragile hope that this powerful CEO might understand why she'd done what she did. When Tasha returned to the garage, night had fully settled in. The neon lights inside glowed brightly against the unusual hush. As she stepped through the doors, she sensed a strange tension in the air. Her former co-workers stood silently, eyes fixed on the manager's office door, no longer mocking, but wary, even concerned. Before she could gather her bearings, a well-dressed, middle-aged man emerged from the office, his expression calm but stern. James Carter himself stood before her, emotionless and authoritative. Derek followed behind him, but the usual smug confidence had vanished from his face, replaced by a rare look of fear. "You must be Tasha Brooks," James said, his rich voice measured and firm, commanding immediate attention. "Yes, sir," Tasha replied, forcing her voice to stay steady even as her heart pounded. James fixed her with a penetrating gaze, as though he were weighing every word and gesture. "I've been briefed on everything that happened yesterday," he continued, his eyes flicking toward Derek with a quiet reproach. "It seems some regrettable actions took place in this shop, actions that should never have occurred." Derek rushed forward, his voice anxious. "Mr. Carter, that's not exactly how it happened. I was only following the rules." James raised a hand to silence him, his glare cutting Derek off immediately. "Mr. Mason, I've heard enough from you. Now I want to hear from Miss Brooks herself." Turning back to Tasha, his tone grew gentler, more sincere. "Tell me, why did you decide to help that man, knowing you could be fired? I want the truth from you." Tasha met his gaze, noting both his seriousness and his willingness to listen. In that moment, her fears and doubts melted away. This was her chance to speak the truth she'd held inside since arriving at this garage, a chance to be truly heard. "I helped Mr. Carter, Ray Carter, because I believe that in an emergency, humanity must come before rigid rules," she said clearly, her confidence shining through. "What hurt me most wasn't losing my job, but being treated with contempt here. I was constantly underestimated and disrespected because of my gender and my skin color. That's simply not fair, and I couldn't stay silent any longer." Her words rang out, piercing the tense quiet. James listened intently, his expression growing more solemn as he absorbed her meaning. Derek stood beside him, white with worry, glancing around as if seeking allies, but no one spoke. Everyone's attention was on this critical exchange. Finally, James gave a slow, deliberate nod, and then turned sharply to Derek, his eyes full of authority. "Mr. Mason, I believe we have more to discuss." Then, facing Tasha again, his voice warm and respectful, he said, "Miss Brooks, please stay. I believe this meeting will yield a result worthy of the courage you've shown." Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her, even though she still didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, real hope kindled in her chest, stronger than anything she'd felt before. Stepping into the large conference room, the bright white lights gleamed off the polished oak table, and Tasha immediately sensed the solemn gravity of the moment. Her heart raced as her eyes fell on the two men waiting at the far end of the room, James Carter, the powerful CEO standing with imposing authority, and beside him, a familiar face that took her breath away. It was Ray. Time seemed to freeze in Tasha's mind, surprise etched across her face. Ray offered her a gentle smile and a warm nod, confirming the thoughts swirling in her head. "Tasha," James Carter began, breaking the tense silence. His voice was deep, serious, but unexpectedly warm and sincere compared to his earlier sternness. "I imagine you're surprised to see Ray here." She nodded, still stunned. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I truly didn't expect—" James allowed himself a small, affectionate smile as he looked at Ray. "Ray Carter is not only my brother, but also co-founder of this auto shop chain. Many years ago, he and I started this company from nothing, enduring the toughest days together to build what you see today." A genuine flicker of emotion crossed James's face as he spoke of Ray. His tone grew richer, filled with respect. "Ray has always been someone who lives with wholehearted integrity, defending the core values we established: honesty, respect, and above all, compassion." Tasha listened in awe. She glanced at Ray and suddenly understood much more about the man she had helped the day before. Though he appeared strong, his eyes now shone with deep gratitude and sincerity toward her. "Yesterday," James continued, his voice now firm and reproachful as he turned toward Derek, who stood with his head bowed in shame. "Ray faced an urgent crisis when his daughter was critically injured. When he walked into our own garage, he should have been met with help and concern. Instead, he encountered indifference, discrimination, and an unreasonable refusal of service." Tasha noticed Derek's hand trembling in fear at the CEO's pointed words. Derek's face was pale, his lips pressed tightly together in silent remorse. "But in that situation," James said, looking back at Tasha with profound admiration, "you, Tasha, were the only one who dared to act. Despite the risk of losing your job, you made the right decision, a decision that not only demonstrated humanity but also embodied the very values this company was founded upon." James stepped closer to her, his gratitude evident. "On behalf of my family and especially Ray, I want to offer you our deepest thanks, Tasha. Not only for saving my brother in his moment of need, but also for reminding us of the core principles we nearly forgot." Ray now advanced, his voice warm and heartfelt. "Tasha, I don't know how to thank you enough. Because of you, I was able to be with my daughter when she needed me most. Your actions mean more than words can express." Tasha met Ray's gaze, her heart swelling with emotion. In that instant, years of bitterness and humiliation lifted from her shoulders. Her kindness and courage had finally been seen and honored. James turned to Derek, his voice cold and authoritative. "Mr. Mason, this incident reveals a serious cultural problem in this garage. I'm deeply disappointed that under your management our foundational values were replaced by prejudice and injustice." Derek remained silent, head bowed, as the CEO's words struck at the pride he had long cloaked in arrogance. His once unshakable confidence had crumbled, leaving only fear. Finally, James looked back at Tasha with sincere determination. "Tasha, please trust me when I say this will be handled fairly and transparently. Your sacrifice will not be in vain, I promise you that." Tasha nodded, feeling as though she were in a meaningful dream where justice and kindness truly prevail. She straightened her posture, hope and a quiet joy blossoming in her chest. For the first time since months of being undervalued, Tasha felt genuinely acknowledged for doing the right thing. And in that moment she realized this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. One full of challenges, but also brimming with faith and hope. The moment James finished speaking, the room fell into an unusually tense silence. His gaze was sharp and unwavering as he fixed Derek Mason, once the powerful manager, who now stood with his head bowed, hands clenched tight. Tasha watched quietly beside them, her heart pounding, not from fear, but because she felt true justice being served for the first time. "Mr. Mason," James's voice rang out with authority, shattering the quiet and jolting Derek's head up, eyes flickering with confusion and anger. "After careful consideration, I've decided that, effective immediately, you will no longer work at this garage." James's decisive words cut into Derek's pride like a blade. Derek's face flushed crimson, anger and helplessness warring in his expression. He tried to recover, his voice trembling as he protested weakly. "Mr. Carter, you can't do this. I've worked here for years. I've always followed company policy to the letter." James stepped forward, his gaze cold and severe, forcing Derek to back away. "Our policies are built on respect, fairness, and non-discrimination," he said. "But your actions were the exact opposite. You treated employees with contempt, wielded your authority to pressure and humiliate others. You didn't just insult Tasha, you violated the very moral standards this company upholds." Derek glanced around, searching for support from his silent co-workers, but all he found was cold indifference. Only then did he truly grasp the cost of his arrogance and prejudice. Those he thought would back him had turned their backs. "I will not tolerate any form of discrimination, whether based on race, gender, or otherwise, in any of our garages," James continued, his tone firm and clear enough for everyone in the room to understand the gravity of the situation. "This isn't just about protecting employees like Tasha. It's about safeguarding the core values and reputation of this company." James looked once more at Tasha, his expression warm and sincere, and her chest lightened as she realized she was not alone. Her principles were being defended by the very head of the company. Derek stood frozen, defeat and despair etched across his face. Finally, he ground out through clenched teeth, "You'll regret this decision, Carter." His last vestige of pride laced with bitterness. "I only regret not seeing sooner what you were doing," James replied coolly. "Now, pack up your things and leave immediately." For a few stunned seconds, Derek seemed to cling to something that was already gone. Then, with a final glare, he stormed from the room in fury and humiliation, his once imposing figure now a pitiful silhouette of defeat. As the doors closed behind Derek, the tension in the room lifted. The co-workers who had remained silent now looked at Tasha with respect and admiration instead of mockery. James stepped over to her, his voice gentle and heartfelt. "Tasha, I'm sorry you had to endure all of this. But I want you to know you did the right thing. From this moment on, I promise our core values of respect and equality will be upheld without exception in this garage." "Thank you, Mr. Carter," Tasha replied, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes shining with gratitude and renewed faith. James returned her nod with a warm smile. "No, I'm the one who should thank you for reminding me of the true values this company was founded on." Standing there, Tasha felt a clarity she had never known before. Ahead lay a new chapter full of promise, where courage and justice had prevailed over long-standing prejudice and injustice. In that moment, for the first time in her life, she felt profoundly relieved and proud. Not because Derek was gone, but because she had found the strength to stand up for what was right, and justice had been served. As Derek's silhouette vanished behind the closed door, a gentle yet profound silence settled over the room. James Carter turned back to Tasha, his eyes now warm and thoughtful, free of the initial icy authority. Tasha stood still, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and hope as she waited for what would come next. James took a deep breath, then stepped forward, addressing the gathered staff with a strong, commanding voice. "Today's events reaffirm not only our company's core values, but also serve as a powerful lesson in respect and fairness for every employee, regardless of background, race, or gender." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, his gaze sweeping the room so each person could feel the message's gravity. Then he met Tasha's eyes again, his tone proud and sincere. "Tasha Brooks, I've thoroughly reviewed your work record. Your accomplishments have been outstanding, far exceeding our expectations. Beyond your exceptional technical skills, you've shown dedication, bravery, and leadership qualities that we desperately need." Tasha's throat tightened with emotion. In all her years here, no one had ever spoken about her with such genuine appreciation. She noticed her co-workers' expressions shift from curiosity to admiration, tinged with shame, as they realized how wrong they'd been to judge her. James smiled gently and continued, his voice both warm and firm. "I'd like to offer you the position of lead technician at this garage. This role comes with a higher salary, improved working conditions, and, most importantly, the opportunity to lead your own team and build a truly fair and proud workplace." The room seemed to pause. Those who had once scorned and mocked her were now stunned, their faces a mix of surprise and embarrassment. Some averted their eyes, others exchanged awkward glances. Tasha looked at James, her voice trembling with sincerity. "Mr. Carter, I don't know how to express my gratitude right now. All I can say is I will do my very best not to let you or the company down." James nodded approvingly and lightly patted her shoulder, a gesture of trust. "I have no doubt you'll excel, Tasha. I trust in your ability, integrity, and leadership. You're the perfect person to restore morale and uphold our genuine values here." After James spoke, the atmosphere relaxed into warmth and relief. A few co-workers stepped forward, meeting Tasha's gaze with genuine respect for the first time. Rick, the one who had always teased her, approached hesitantly, his expression unexpectedly sincere. "Tasha, I'm truly sorry for how I treated you before. I hope you'll give us the chance to make it right and help build a more united team." Tasha met Rick's remorseful eyes, nodded, and offered a gentle but determined smile. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them. I'm ready to work with everyone so this garage can become a place we're all proud to be part of." Soft applause began, gradually growing louder until it filled the room. It wasn't just recognition, it was a collective commitment to change, to fairness, and to unity. Surrounded by her sincere colleagues, Tasha felt deeply moved. This moment wasn't just a career-changing opportunity for her, it was a turning point in how everyone here viewed respect and equality. For the first time in years, she truly felt that her kindness, honesty, and hard work were finally recognized for their real worth. And as she looked into James's warm, trusting eyes, Tasha knew this was her chance to write a vibrant new chapter in her life, one she would lead herself, never bowing to injustice again. As the last rays of sunlight slipped behind Manhattan's skyscrapers, Tasha stepped out of the garage with a feeling she'd never known before. She paused on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and let the cool, late-afternoon air fill her lungs, washing away the fatigue and worries of the past days. Never had she felt so proud and strong. The looks that once wounded her, the taunts that once hurt her, none of it held power over her anymore. She had overcome it all, not just through patience but through fierce courage and steadfast commitment to her values. Standing beneath the soft glow of a street lamp, Tasha realized her story was more than that of a young woman fighting injustice in an auto shop. It was the story of bravery, of standing up for compassion, dignity, and moral integrity, things anyone can lose if they stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. In that moment, a familiar voice called out behind her, "Tasha!" She turned to see Ray Carter standing next to his Harley-Davidson, offering a warm, genuine smile. His eyes now shone with peace and endless gratitude. "Ray," Tasha said, surprised but delighted, "I didn't expect you'd still be here." "I wanted to thank you once more," Ray said as he walked closer, his voice warmer and more heartfelt than ever. "Not only for helping me when I was at my lowest, but also for what you did afterward. You taught all of us a vital lesson in humanity and integrity." Tasha looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She knew Ray's words were no empty courtesy. They were a profound recognition of everything she had fought and endured. "I just did what I thought was right," Tasha replied softly, pride shining in her eyes. "Even if it cost me, I now know that cost was worth it." Ray nodded sincerely, admiration plain in his gaze. "Absolutely, Tasha. In a world that can be so harsh, holding on to kindness and courage is priceless. You proved that more powerfully than anyone I've ever met." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card, handing it to her with trust and warmth. "If you ever need anything, remember I'm here. Not just me. James also holds you in the highest regard. We're always ready to support you." Tasha accepted the card, her eyes lighting up. It wasn't a promise to be taken lightly, but a genuine commitment, a reminder she was no longer alone. "Thank you, Ray," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. This means so much to me." Ray smiled one last time, then climbed onto the Harley. The roar of the engine blended with the city's evening bustle as he gave a final nod and sped off into the glowing sunset. Tasha stood quietly. Her heart warmed and her spirit lifted. She realized that although society can be cruel, the most important thing was to live true to her compassion and the moral values she held dear. With firmer steps than ever before, Tasha walked the crowded Manhattan street, confident and looking ahead. Fear had no place in her gaze now, only determination and fierce hope for the future. Tasha Brooks's story isn't just her own. It's the story of anyone who's ever faced injustice or prejudice. From now on, she knew she would always stand up for what's right, protecting dignity and fairness for everyone around her. And as night fell and the Manhattan lights sparkled to life, Tasha understood she was turning the page to a new chapter, one in which she would always hold her head high, live fully by her values, and never bow before any challenge. Don't forget to like and share this inspiring story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.